This video is of my backpacking trip in September to Isle Royale National Park, which is a remote island only 15 miles from the north coast of Lake Superior. This travel log is a collection of about 300 photos with several video clips like this one mixed in. It is not a fancy movie, so if that's your desire, stop now. However, if you want to watch on, you'll see what the island looks and sounds like, as well as hearing some interesting things about the area. You'll also see several photographic works of art, like this sunrise from the 3 Mile campground. But most images will be simple, handheld snapshots of the trail and my campsites. So if you're still interested, let me tell you my tale. To get to Isle Royale, I took a float plane from Houghton Hancock in Michigan's Upper Peninsula. First, we had to load all of our gear onto the carts, and then the staff stored the packs in the actual floats of the plane. Before we took off, the pilot first gave us an orientation. The plane carried 6 passengers, plus the pilot, and we all got headphones to wear. This is me with my headphones. As you can see, there is also a small mic that swivels down so we can hear the pilot talk. While we watch a video of us taking flight, let me tell you a bit about myself. I've been backpacking 3 times to Isle Royale and spent a week working around the island as a common loon bander more than 3 decades ago. This video follows the same sequence as my hike. All the images were captured by me, and all the music is by my daughter Aspen. Here is my musical introduction, and then I'll continue on with my tale once we have taken flight. Hancock starts to look like a model train layout as the plane climbs. This is the city of Hancock's beach and campground. If you want to tent before heading to the island, this is a good option, but they only have 14 tent sites. I hear it's a great place to camp, but I opted for a hotel this trip. Soon we leave the Keweenaw Peninsula behind and head out over Lake Superior to Isle Royale, which is 56 miles from the Michigan mainland and takes about 45 minutes. Hope I don't need to worry about these instructions, or that I would need this bag. Now that we've had our comic interlude, let's continue with the flight. As we cross Superior, we fly over a Great Lakes freighter. As we passed the boat, I looked back just as shafts of sunlight broke through the clouds. Soon we arrive at Washington Harbor and fly by the historic Barnum Colony. This is one of the earliest summer resorts at Isle Royale, and has been designated an official National Historic Place. There are about 17 well-preserved historic structures on the island, including the John's Hotel that was built in 1892. George Barnum was a Duluth grain merchant who bought the island in 1902 and built a log cabin for his family on the west end of the island. He also invited several of his friends to build cabins at his private summer resort. Here is a video of our landing on Washington Harbor, which is at the west end of Isle Royale. While we watch the video, let me tell you a bit about Isle Royale. This national park is actually an archipelago of about 450 islands. The main island is about 45 miles long and 9 miles wide. It is the largest island on the largest lake in the Western Hemisphere. Because of its remote location, the park is the least visited of the national parks in the lower 48 states, but also has the longest average stay. The island is 99% designated wilderness area, and the interior is only accessed by hiking, canoeing, or kayaking. There is a lodge for guests on the eastern end of the island at Rock Harbor. Isle Royale National Park was authorized by Congress in 1931 for the purpose of setting apart a remote island archipelago and surrounding waters in Lake Superior for the benefit and enjoyment of the public, and to preserve and protect its wilderness character, cultural and natural resources, and ecological processes. The park was also designated an International Biosphere Reserve by the United Nations in November of 1980. Once we dock at Windigo, we unload our gear from the seaplane. Windigo is the main Park Service's center on the western end of the island. There's a visitor center, store, and modern bathroom with showers here. The day we arrived was the final day of the season. By the way, these are shed moose antlers. There are about 1,000 moose on the island. Like elk and deer, they shed their antlers each year. This is the view from the store's deck. I had to buy camp fuel for my stove before heading down the trail because you couldn't take fuel on the float plane. Of course, since I was in the store anyway, I bought a cold Coke and a candy bar. This is the last modern bathroom I would see until reaching Rock Harbor, so I also spent a little time here too. Before heading out on the trail, I had to self-register for a permit on the deck of the visitor center. You will see it hanging on the back of my backpack and at my campsites. When you fly to the island, there is no ranger orientation that the folks get when you arrive by ferry boat. In the Windigo Visitor Center, they had a display about wolves. Apparently, there are currently about 30 on the island. This sign is actually from Rock Harbor, but I'm showing it to you now because I want to talk about the moose and wolves of Isle Royale. Moose arrived on the island in the early 20th century. They were thought to have swum to the island, but now some think, based on DNA tests, that the first moose on the island may have been introduced by humans for hunting. The wolves arrived by crossing frozen Lake Superior in 1948. 10 years later, in 1958, the scientific study of Isle Royale's wolves and the moose started. This is the longest predator-prey study in the world and a bit of a wildlife odyssey. Although being hunted by wolves, the moose population continued to grow and had tripled by the 1980s. The wolves also reached a maximum population of about 50. As the moose population then began to decline, researchers started to wonder if it could be possible that the wolves would drive their prey to extinction. Then the wolf population plummeted from 50 to 14 because of a canine disease, which is believed to have been inadvertently introduced by a pet dog. With a population of only 14, extinction of Isle Royale's wolves became a real concern. Although the wolf population fluctuated a little, the population never recovered even though the canine disease disappeared and moose were more abundant. Researchers started to suspect that the decline was also being caused by inbreeding. Eventually, the moose population tripled to about 2,400. Then a harsh winter, lack of forage for food, and an outbreak of ticks combined to cause a crash in the moose population to about 500. By 2018, there were only 2 highly inbred wolves left on the island. The National Park Service then began relocating wolves to the island to help boost their population and keep the again rising number of moose in check. They began relocating wolves from Minnesota, Canada, and Michigan's Upper Peninsula to the island. Those efforts quickly started to pay off, with 1 litter of pups being born in 2019, followed by 2 litters in both 2020 and 2021. The population of wolves is now about 30 individuals, and the moose population is about 1,000. Sorry for this long telling of Isle Royale's predator-prey saga, but I find this stuff fascinating. It seems that the more we study nature, the more we discover just how much studying we need to do. The world is indeed a complicated place. Having eaten a quick snack and gotten water, I'm ready now to head out into the North Woods towards the Greenstone Ridge Trail. As I leave Windigo, I was already starting to see beaver sign like this tree. Before this trip, I'd never seen red squirrels eating mushrooms, but I saw several during this trip munching on the fungi. Red squirrel populations on the island are much higher than the mainland. This is thought to be due to their main predator, the marten, not being present on the island, although red foxes and some hawks do eat the squirrels too. On the west end of the island, the Greenstone Ridge Trail runs mostly through a sugar maple forest, mixed with yellow birches and other hardwood species. This is the part of the island where Native Americans in pre-colonial times would come in the spring to collect sap and boil it down to make maple sugar. They also seasonally hunted the now locally extinct woodland caribou and fished for trout and whitefish. It is very likely that the Greenstone Trail I hike now was traversed by families of Ojibwe as they were hunting and gathering on the island. Although the Ojibwe primarily lived on the north shore of Lake Superior, they crossed the Isle Royale in the spring to hunt and gather food before returning in August or September to the mainland to gather wild rice. Native Americans also traveled the island's trails to mine pure copper from pits using rocks and maybe fire to chisel away at surface deposits. There is archaeological evidence that mining started on the island about 4,500 years ago. The copper that was mined here was traded broadly across North America. My first night on the island, I stayed at the Island Mine campground, which is about 6.5 miles from Windigo. This campground is near the site of a copper mine established in 1873. A village was built on Siskiwit Bay south of here, and a road about 2 miles long was built inland to the mine. There isn't much evidence of this today. There was only one other couple camping at Island Mine that night, so I reviewed the available campsites and chose site number 3. It had 2 trees from which to string my tarp, flat rocks for my kitchen, and some logs on which to sit. This trip, I left my tent at home and instead brought a bivy sack to keep my sleeping bag dry and keep any bugs off my face. The tarp was from my camping hammock. At night, I put my backpack next to me and my food in a tree to keep it safe from foxes, squirrels, and mice. There are no bears on Isle Royale, which makes keeping food safe much easier than backpacking on the mainland. Each campground has its own pit toilets. Having designated campsites and outhouses help to limit human impacts on the natural quality of the wilderness by confining visitors to pooping and peeing in designated areas. I found that the privies on the interior of the island tended to be nicer, as in less used and thus less stinky than those encountered as I got closer to Rock Harbor. There is a little stream that runs by the campground where you can gather and filter water. However, this sometimes runs dry, so you are best asking at the visitor center or asking other backpackers on the trail if there is water currently at the Island Mine campground. The next morning, I headed for the Lake Desor campground. Soon after heading down the trail, I was surprised by a wonderful wildlife encounter. It is this sort of wildlife encounter that makes Isle Royale such a special place. Having gotten a couple of nice pictures of the moose, I head back down the trail to allow them to go about their lives undisturbed by me. Let's hike on and explore some more of the island. As I continue down the Greenstone Trail, I admire the forest. The forests of Isle Royale are mostly virgin timber, having never been clear-cut. However, the island's thin soil means that the big stands of tall trees, like the white pines favored by the lumber barons, did not grow on this island. By the time Michigan's tall stands of white pines had all been felled and the lumber barons started to look for smaller, less desirable trees for pulpwood, Isle Royale was in the process of being acquired by the National Park Service, and most of the park was spared the lumberman's axe. There were only 2 lumber camps established, one by Windigo and the other at the head of Siskiwit Bay. As I continue to hike, I also start to notice some evidence of past forest fires, like the burned bark of this tree. The biggest forest fire in modern times was in 1936, just as the National Park Service took control of the park. The fire was started by a tourist in July, near the lumber camp on Siskiwit Bay. The previous winter, they had logged part of their property, and their slash piles helped fuel the forest fire. It was August by the time the fire was contained with the help of rain. It burned 27,000 acres of the island's 134,000 total acres. Thankfully, there is little evidence of that fire now as I hike down the Greenstone. Did you know that the trails themselves were a bit controversial when the park was established with the charter to preserve wilderness? Some argued that there should be no trails in the interior of the island and that visitors should stay in the resort areas. However, Park Service architect Donald Walbrink argued that the trails were buffers against the reckless and unexperienced traveler that would blaze their own trails. The Park Service decided to build what they call 12-inch manways. Walbrink explained, "We are not attempting to build trails. We are providing a means to access while showing no signs of construction." Park Service staff and volunteers do an excellent job maintaining these wilderness trails. They are constantly clearing wind blows with cross-cut saws and rerouting the trails around new beaver dams. Consequently, the miles shown on trail signs, maps, and the useful campground to campground mileage chart the Park Service publishes are more of a guideline than exact miles between points. This is a living, dynamic wilderness area, and consequently, the trails sometimes change a bit from season to season. Now let's head down to Lake Desor and set up camp. I checked out the available sites and set up in Site 4. Once I was set up, I headed down to the lake to soak in the wilderness. The lake was very peaceful, but a rainstorm was moving in, so I headed back to camp. That night, the raindrops and calls of loons lulled me to sleep. And I awoke to a foggy morning. I enjoyed taking pictures of the foggy morning, but it was time to head back down the trail. Today, I will be hiking to Ishpeming Point and on to Hatchet Lake for the night. As I headed down the trail, I noticed this game camera. The wolf researchers use these cameras as part of their wolf monitoring program. I waved at the camera and continued down the trail. Let's listen to Aspen's song Leave It Be while looking at pictures from the day's hike.
I like to walk alone, moving like the rain, thinking for myself and living unafraid of judging eyes, so I keep my windows open. The people passing by always seem to notice. Just leave it be. They can't understand what they can't see. And when I leave, let them wonder why I'm still smiling while I'm traveling alone. Wear my heart on my sleeve, have no secrets left to sell. But every friend I meet can't seem to figure me out. I'm so emotional, miss over her head. But their heads are in the sand. How can they all hear anything that I've just said? Just leave it be. They can't understand what they can't see. Traveling alone. Look at me. Just leave it be. They can't understand what they can't see. And when I leave, let them wonder why I'm still smiling. Just leave it be. They can't understand what they can't see. I'm traveling, while I'm traveling, while I'm traveling alone.
Having completed today's hike along the Greenstone, I head down to my next campsite. After half a mile hike downhill, I arrive at Hatchet Lake. Here at the lake, the trail splits. To the right, the trail heads north to the Minong Trail. By the way, Minong is what the Ojibwe call Isle Royale, and it means a good place. I headed to the left, another 2/10 of a mile to the campground. None of the campsites at Hatchet are right on the lake. I ended up at Site 1, which was the furthest from the water, but still very convenient and close to the pit toilet, but not too close, if you know what I mean. After making camp and eating dinner, I headed down to the lake to enjoy the view. Although I was hiking solo this trip, I did meet other hikers on the trail. In the evenings, several of us would often gather around the water access points and talk while enjoying the afternoon turn into twilight. This evening, 2 loons swam by as we watched. and then a beaver cruised by, untroubled by our presence. Here's a zoomed-in picture of the beaver. As the evening darkens, we all head off to sleep. I was awakened by the calls of 20 or so Canada geese as they made their way south in their distinctive wedge formation. They were soon joined by the call of loons filling the primeval dawn with their song. Let's listen to the morning chorus and look at some of the landscape photos I captured this morning. Having broken camp, I headed back out on the trail. The trail's a bit of a climb from Hatchet Lake back up to the Greenstone. Having reached the trail intersection, I head east towards Chicken Bone Lake. The trail here has a lot more openings than the trail west of Hatchet Lake. I think of this being the start of the east end of the island, where the forest changes to stands of spruce, fir, birch, and aspen trees. The island here is typically rockier, with thinner soils and more wetter areas. To protect the wetlands of the island, the park staff and volunteers have installed wooden planks. Like the trails, these wooden walkways are about 12 inches wide. While hiking, I don't wear a watch. However, I do use my phone to listen to books on tape, while using only one earbud so my other ear can listen for wildlife. I will include the links of the books I listened to in the video description. The first two were True North and Returning to Earth by the late Michigan author Jim Harrison. The books are set in Michigan's Upper Peninsula, and much of the plot took place in some of my old UP stomping grounds. Author Chris Dombrowski was a friend and fishing guide of Jim's and recommended the books. Chris grew up near Lansing fishing the local streams, but made his way west to Montana. Later he taught at Interlochen, where my daughter went to school, before he became too homesick for Montana. If you enjoy the outdoors, his book, The River You Touch, is definitely worth a read. I love looking at the colorful autumn mushrooms and watching the wind in the trees. Hiking solo can be a peaceful and rewarding experience. Even when I backpack with friends, we usually spread out along the trail to give each other some space to soak in the solitude. However, when we come to an intersection or a beautiful overlook, we'll wait till everyone gets there and spend some time communing with nature before hiking on. Lichens cover most of the rocks and some trees on Isle Royale. They were the first plants to reappear after the glaciers retreated 10,000 years ago. They help break down and prepare the way for mosses, ferns, and eventually flowering plants and trees. They started the process that created this North Woods wilderness island we know of today. From fungus to a forest in just 10,000 years. Sounds like a subtitle of an essay, doesn't it? Having arrived at Chicken Bone intersection, I headed north down to the lakeside campground. Being early September, the trees haven't turned yet, but you can still find some early colorful leaves like this one on the trail. The campsites at West Chicken Bone are a mix of sites on the lake and inland. There are 2 campgrounds on this lake, East and West Chicken Bone. When I got to West Chicken Bone, all the sites on the water were taken, but there was a couple in Site 1 that was just taking a break before pressing on. Seeing me looking for a campsite, they generously asked me if I would like Site 1. I set up camp, refilled my water bottles, and hung my food between 2 trees. I heard there was a fox prowling around the campsites hoping to snag some food. It seems like everyone there except me saw the fox. I cooled my feet in the lake, enjoying the evening, and let the landscape soak into my soul. As evening changed to twilight, I headed to bed. In the morning, I heated water for my breakfast of instant oatmeal and tea. I try to keep my meals simple when backpacking. For lunch, I eat beef jerky while hiking and have dried fruit and nuts for snacks. For dinner, I bring a freeze-dried meal. Cooking for me is basically boiling water. Today I'm going to leave the Greenstone and head south to Lake Richie and then on to Moskey Basin for the night. From there, I will hike along the lakeshore to Rock Harbor. The trail's mostly downhill from here, and there are frequent boardwalks through the wet areas. There are several inland lakes along this section of trail. In fact, much of the hiking in this section of the island doubles as portages for canoes and kayaks. I also come across this pile of lumber for trail maintenance. The Park Service actually brings in this lumber by helicopter, and then staff and volunteers install them. This part of the park is more heavily trafficked, and folks are carrying boats through here. So some of the boardwalks are double the size of those deeper in the backcountry, and there are some bridges too. So I was continuing down the trail, taking more pictures of mushrooms when I saw it. My first wolf track of the trip. A park ranger had told me there was an active wolf pack in this area, but I still found seeing the track super surprising. If you pay attention and watch the muddy and sandy spots, finding wolf tracks is possible on Isle Royale. If you're lucky, you may even hear the wolves at night. I had had that experience at West Chicken Bone more than 3 decades ago. This trip, while camping at Lake Desor, I met a fellow hiker named Zach who had heard the wolves while camping at the Washington Harbor campground near Windigo. If you are really, really extremely lucky, you may actually get to see one of the wolves that reside on the island. Now paying even more attention to the woods surrounding me, I continue on, following the wolf tracks down the trail. Soon I see Lake Richie, but no wolves. Reaching the hiking trail intersection, I take a break, and Zach, the guy who heard the wolves at Washington Harbor a couple nights ago, caught up with me. This is a selfie I took of Zach and I at Rock Harbor. For most of the hike, we were on the same itinerary. Most days, I would hit the trail a little earlier than Zach, and I would hike alone most of the morning. But at about midday, he would catch up to me on the trail. Then we would usually hike together until we reached the next camp. The day I hiked from Hatchet to West Chicken Bone, I was surprised that Zach and the others that I had camped with the previous night hadn't passed me on the trail. I was so proud of myself that for an old guy like me, I was making some good time at the head of the pack until I got to Chicken Bone, and there they all were, already set up and ready for the night. Apparently, I was actually the last to hit the trail that morning. As I said before, tonight we were staying at Moskey Basin. To get to the campground, you have to first cross this bridge. Moskey has both campsites and shelters. Zach and I were both lucky to get shelters to ourselves. I stayed in shelter too. It had a great view of the East Bay towards Rock Harbor. Since it was late in the season, I was able to get a shelter to myself and spread out my gear. When the island is busy, hikers must share shelters and campsites. But tonight, I have the shelter and the view all to myself. This trip, I brought a Goal Zero portable solar panel for the first time. Until this point, I hadn't got much sunlight to recharge my battery, but while at Moskey Basin, I was able to recharge the battery from dead to about 3/4 power level. One thing I like to do at the shelters is to check out all the graffiti. Here are some of my favorites from the Moskey Basin and 3 Mile campground shelters, and the song Thank You by my daughter Aspen. This song is about mixed feelings, and I definitely have mixed feelings about shelter graffiti, which technically is vandalism and illegal. It's even part of the orientation. The rangers say, don't vandalize the tables, benches, and shelters. I like the artwork and poetry, but I could do without the Waldo was here in 2018, and this is where I hiked.
One, two, three, four. You're the hero of my nightmares, a villain in my dreams. I don't know what to think when you're around me. I bend over backwards just to get hurt again. But once I give up, you give in again. So I say thank you for the mixed feelings I feel around you. Thank you for the mixed reasons for how I love you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. You can read anybody if you look into their eyes, but there could be a mystery in their cloudy like the London sky. A little wish, a shooting star to look into your mind. But if I could, would I still want you like when I was blind? So I say thank you for the mixed feelings I feel around you. Thank you for the mixed reasons for how I love you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you.
This poem was on a piece of birch bark in my shelter at Moskey Basin. When I first noticed something white on a shelf, I was annoyed thinking someone had left some litter, but instead they had left me this thoughtful poem. I took a picture of it and left it there for another hiker to discover. For drinking water on Isle Royale, I used the Sawyer squeeze system. First, I would use an empty bottle which I dedicated to filling the Sawyer bladder with unfiltered water. You don't want to drink out of your filling bottle. It kind of defeats the purpose of filtering the water. Then I would put the Sawyer filter on the bladder and squeeze the bladder to force the water through the filter and into the drinking bottle. In this manner, I was able to have delicious and safe drinking water for my trip to the island. In the evenings, I like to find a place with a nice view, so I rounded up Zach and we headed over to the rocks above the dock. We watched the bay while talking about life. There was a pair of osprey that were flying around. They were talon grabbing and circling overhead. Looking at the pictures now, I see one of them actually had a fish in its talons. As we sat there, we noticed that a boat was heading our way down the bay. It was one of the park's water taxis dropping off a couple of backpackers. Water taxis are an interesting alternative to starting a trip at Rock Harbor, where the ferries and float planes dock. You can also catch a ride on the Voyager 2 that provides service from Grand Portage, Minnesota to Isle Royale, which stops at several places along the south and north shore every couple of days. If you plan to visit Isle Royale, you definitely need to visit the park's website for transportation options and details. I love the Moskey Basin area. It's beautiful. I was first here with my late father in 1992, and I'm hoping to bring my kids here in the future. Enjoy the sights and sounds from the evening I spent here. Tomorrow I'll be hiking to 3 Mile Campsite. The morning was overcast, so I ate breakfast and headed out on the trail early. Today, I am hiking from Moskey to Daisy Farm and then on to 3 Mile Campground. By this point in my backpacking trip, I was listening to my third book on tape, which was Of Wolves and Men by Barry Lopez. So while I was listening to Barry talk about humanity's complex relationship with and understanding of wolves, I see the largest wolf print I have ever seen. That is my hiking boot, which is a size 8.5 for reference. This is a big wolf headed down this trail ahead of me. I continued down the trail watching for other prints and thinking about wolves. The Ojibwe that lived in this area called wolves meantion. Their oral teachings say that when the world started, the wolf was put here to help people. They were an example and a partner to man. Barry's book tells how indigenous people looked to wolves for examples of both how to hunt and live effectively as a group. There was plenty of sign like this pileated woodpecker excavations, but no more wolf sign. Then I came over a rise through some trees, and right there on top of this rock, I caught a glimpse of a wolf. The sighting was too brief to take a picture. The wolf and I both did a double take, not believing what we both were seeing. Then it ducked behind the rock upon which it stood and disappeared into the woods. It had a coat that was more of a reddish-orange hue than gray or black. I was shocked and honored to have caught a glimpse of a wolf. I was expecting to see tracks and hoping to hear the wolves howl one night, but I never thought I would see one. Thank you, meantion. After shaking off the disbelief from the wildlife encounter, I dropped my pack to explore the area where I saw the wolf, but I didn't hear or see it again, so I reshouldered my pack and headed back down the trail. The trail isn't always easy to follow through the rocky areas, so people have built small rock cairns like these to help keep hikers on trail. I noticed my shadow on the rock and liked the way it looked, so I took a couple of shots, and actually, I liked the first picture I took best. As you've probably realized by now, I love looking at lichens, mosses, and mushrooms. Before I knew it, I was in the Daisy Farm campground. Besides Rock Harbor, I think this is the main campground on the island, which as you can see even has a picnic shelter. Across from Daisy Farm is the Edison Fishery. This is the most intact surviving example of a small, family-operated commercial fishery on Isle Royale. The fish camp structures include the main house, the fish house, the dock, and a variety of outbuildings. I got a bit confused at Daisy Farm. but eventually found the trail and was back on my way to 3 Mile. This trip I saw a lot of beaver sign at the inland lakes and along Rock Harbor. Zach and I had talked about how surprising this seemed to us. Later I read that when beaver populations are at really large levels, they will move into areas like inland lakes instead of staying in the typical beaver ponds they make for themselves by building dams. Based on all the beavers we saw in the open lake areas, the population must be really big right now. The trail along this section stays close to the shore. Of course, there's still boardwalks where the trail crosses wetlands. Between Daisy Farm and 3 Mile is where the old Siskiwit mine was built in 1850. From the trail, you can even see one of the old copper mine shafts. The deepest shaft dug in this area went down about 350 feet. While I was taking a break at the mine, Zach caught up to me and I told him about my wolf sighting. After eating some snacks and drinking some water, we hiked together the rest of the way to 3 Mile Campground. Arriving at the campground, we went in search for shelters. I chose Shelter 5, set up, relaxed, ate dinner, and then headed to the dock to watch the sunset before calling it night. The sky was clear when I awoke. After a quick peek to see if the weather was good for picture taking, I rushed back to grab my tripod and camera. This was definitely the nicest sunrise of the trip. The colors were amazing. Let's watch a video of the sunrise while we listen to my daughter Aspen's song, Sunrise.
I'm scared of what the morning brings. I'm scared of what it means to me. Sunrise, oh, tell me how you can wake up the world. Sunrise, oh, tell me how you have the strength to rise. Help me believe in miracles, 'cause I need one. And I've tried to find God in an instant, and I've cried. Wanna find hope, but it's distant. Sunrise, oh, tell me how you can wake up the world. Sunrise, oh, tell me how you have the strength to rise. Help me believe in miracles, 'cause I need one. Sunrise, daylight, ooh, wake me, revive, breathe life, ooh. Help me believe in miracles, 'cause I need one. Help me believe in miracles, 'cause you are one.
Having enjoyed a tremendous sunrise, Zach and I packed up and headed to Rock Harbor. First, we had to backtrack a bit, because we wanted to take the Mount Franklin Trail to the Tobin Harbor Trail and then take that trail into Rock Harbor. The The hike today is only about 3 miles. I love the scenery on the Tobin Harbor Trail, plus it's not as rocky as the trail along Rock Harbor. It's much easier on your feet. Before long, we were at the outskirts of Rock Harbor. The first thing we did was look for a shelter. Because Rock Harbor is so busy, we shared a shelter that night. We picked Shelter 7, which sat a ways back off the trail. In Rock Harbor, there are paved pathways, a visitor center, boats for rentals or docks to tie off if you have your own boat, and a restaurant and lodge sit at the end of the harbor. Unfortunately, the restaurants had recently closed because we were at the end of their season. Zach and I walked around the resort to check it out and hoped to find a working vending machine, but they were all empty. Some of the room doors were open and we peeked inside. It looked like a pretty nice place to stay, especially having been sleeping on the ground all week. They even had new mattresses. Thankfully, there was a modern bathroom open by the lodge, but the bathrooms by the visitor center were closed, as well as the showers. Apparently, they had plumbing issues and had closed early for the season. There are some interesting historical signs in Rock Harbor, including this one about the resorts of Isle Royale that were established in the 1920s. This small cottage, which serves as a health center, is one of the little tourist cabins from the resort called the Spruces. Although I didn't hike it this trip, this sign is for the Stoll Trail Loop that goes to Scott Point, east of Rock Harbor. It's about a 4-mile hike that it's named after Albert Stoll. He was the conservation editor for the Detroit Free Press that was instrumental in working to gain public support to add Isle Royale to our national park system. After exploring Rock Harbor, we headed back to our shelter to make dinner. Our site was popular with birds feeding in the pines that surrounded us. And then a young fox showed up, hunting for grasshoppers. Here's a short video. I also managed to get a couple nice pictures of this young fellow. I enjoyed my last evening on Isle Royale and watched the sunset. It was the end of a perfect week of walking among moose, listening to loons, and even glimpsing a wolf. For me, Isle Royale is the perfect mix of solitude, community, and wildness. The morning was very rainy and foggy. I was on the first plane, so I boarded, and we taxied down Tobin Harbor to take off. Here's a video of our departure. Unfortunately, the weather was very bad in Houghton, so the plane circled back to Isle Royale and I spent an extra hour waiting for the weather to clear. I did make it back to Houghton that day, but Zach and everyone else that was supposed to leave ended up having to spend an extra day on the island. If you plan a visit, please remember to take some extra food. Thank you for watching my video. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe to my channel, and if you liked Aspen's music, please subscribe to her channel as well. In closing, here is the video of our second departure flight from Isle Royale. Stay curious, friends, and go take a hike.
This is the first vacation you've been on without your wife and kids?
Yeah.
So...
Yeah, I know.
How are you going to know? You're going to have to bring them here and see if you feel the same way.
Oh my God,